A man went still in the middle of a packed room. 12 feet away, behind an old upright piano, a young waitress was playing 4 bars of a melody that was never supposed to exist. No record had ever captured it, no sheet music carried it, no archive, no bootleg, no fan recording from 60 years of saved tape. And yet there it was, fallen from her fingers note for note, exact, unmistakable. The man in the flat cap did not blink. He had heard that exact arrangement only once before in a hospital corridor in 1962, played softly on a cheap upright nobody remembers anymore. He had written it himself. He had given it away with one condition attached, and for over 6 decades not a single living person had broken that condition. Until tonight. For a moment, no one in the room moved. The waitress, a 26-year-old named Maris Calloway, had no idea the man near the back had gone pale. She had no idea her hands were carrying a secret she had never been told she was keeping. All she knew was that tonight marked 1 year since her father's funeral, and that this was the only song he had ever asked her to remember. But that moment didn't start there. It started months earlier in a small flat above a laundrette in Liverpool, where Maris sat across from her dying father and listened to him hum 4 bars of a tune he refused to name. He hummed it at the kitchen table. He hummed it in the hospital, machines counting his breaths in the background. He made her promise one thing before the morphine took the rest of his words. If she ever played that melody for anyone, she was never to explain where it came from, because she didn't know, and neither, he said, should anyone else. She had agreed without understanding why a tune could need a promise that large. She was about to find out exactly how large that promise was, sitting at a piano bench in a small Liverpool bar, in front of a stranger in a flat cap, who already knew everything her father had spent 30 years refusing to say. Tommy Calloway had spent 40 years being the man nobody noticed. He was Cavern Club road crew in 1962, 18 years old, hauling amplifiers down 16 stone steps, sweeping cigarette ash off a stage that smelled of damp brick. He was not a musician. He never claimed to be one, but he had been in the room on nights that quietly decided what music would become, and he carried 2 things out of that decade that he never spoke about outside his own kitchen: a scar on his left hand from a dropped speaker cabinet, and 4 bars of a melody he had been asked personally to forget. He never forgot it. Maris grew up watching her father hum it without realizing he was doing it at the cooker, in the car, fixing a leaking tap under the sink. She asked him once, when she was 9, what song it was. He told her it didn't have a name. She believed him, the way children believe the things adults say with a closed face. She was 26 now, working evening shifts at the Quarry House, a narrow piano bar 2 streets back from the old cavern site, the kind of place that survived on regulars and cheap pints rather than tourists. The piano in the corner was older than she was, slightly out of tune in the upper register, and she played it after closing, the way her father used to play after his shifts ended, alone, for no one. Her father had died 11 months and 29 days earlier of a heart that had been tired longer than anyone admitted out loud. The funeral had been small. The grief had not been. Tonight was the anniversary, and Maris had asked Frank Doyle, who ran the Quarry House and had known her father for 30 years, if she could take 10 minutes on the small stage after the scheduled act finished. She did not tell him what she planned to play. She had not told anyone. She did not fully understand why she needed to play it in front of strangers rather than alone, only that grief, after a year, stopped staying private. She had no way of knowing the only man alive who could explain why her father carried that secret for 60 years was already sitting at a corner table 12 feet from the piano, waiting for a performer who hadn't arrived yet. By 8 o'clock, the Quarry House was 3 drinks past comfortable, and the air had gone thick with noise. Frank Doyle worked the small stage like he always did on open mic nights, keeping the lineup loose, letting regulars take their turn between a folk duo and a teenager doing covers of songs older than his parents. Nobody in the room knew that tonight's list had one more name on it than usual, and nobody knew why. Maris stood behind the bar through the first 3 acts, pulling pints with hands that would not stay steady. She had played the melody alone in this room 100 times after closing, when the only audience was stacked chairs and a mop bucket. She had never played it for anyone breathing. The thought of doing it now in front of strangers who had no idea what they were about to hear made her stomach fold in on itself. She kept circling the same fear. Her father had asked her not to explain where the song came from. He had never told her not to play it. She told herself the distinction mattered. She was not entirely convinced. If stories like this one are already pulling something out of you, take a second now and subscribe, because what happens next in this video is the kind of moment people remember for the rest of their lives. At 20 past 9, Frank caught her eye from across the room and gave the small nod they had agreed on earlier. Her stomach dropped the way it had the morning of the funeral, a feeling she recognized immediately and hated immediately. She untied her apron, folded it over the bar rail, and walked toward the piano on legs that did not feel entirely her own. The room did not quiet down for her. Nobody expected anything from the waitress who occasionally filled a dead slot between better acts. A few people glanced up. Most did not. She sat down. She placed her hands on the keys the way her father used to, wrists low, shoulders soft, a posture she had copied without ever being taught it. She had no idea that 12 feet away, a man who had spent 60 years burying this exact moment was setting his drink down for the second time that decade because he had recognized the way she placed her hands before she played a single note. The first notes came out steady, which surprised her. She had expected her hands to shake the way they always did when stakes felt too high, but the melody arrived the way it had every night. She had played it alone, soft and aching, built around silence as much as sound. The room did not recognize it. There was no shape to grab onto, no key change anyone could hum along to, nothing built for a Tuesday night crowd, 3 drinks deep. Conversations that had quieted out of habit started drifting back. A man near the bar said something to his friend, who laughed. Maris kept playing. She had not expected applause. She had not expected understanding either. But the restlessness still landed somewhere she felt it. 12 feet away, the man in the flat cap had not moved since the second bar. He had been 20 years old the first time he played that melody, in a hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic and burnt coffee, for a friend whose wife had died the night before a show neither of them could cancel. He remembered the exact weight of the upright piano they had wheeled into that corridor. He remembered his own hands shaking, not from fear, but from not knowing how to hand someone 4 bars of comfort when there were no words left that worked. He had given Tommy that song and asked him never to let it become anything more than what it was meant to be, a private thing, carried quietly, for one grieving man and no one else. He had believed for 62 years that the secret had died with Tommy. His friend at the table reached across and touched his arm, asking without words if he was all right. He did not answer. He could not look away from the waitress's hands, which moved exactly like Tommy's had. The same careless economy of motion, the same way of leaning slightly forward into the soft notes. He reached up and removed his cap, not as a gesture, but because his hands needed somewhere to go. He stood. His friend tried once more to stop him. He gently moved the hand aside, the way a man moves something small out of the way of something larger, and took his first step toward the piano, toward a truth he had buried longer than Maris had been alive, and toward a room that had no idea what it was about to witness. He crossed the room in 11 steps, and nobody noticed him until he was already at the piano. Maris felt the bench shift before she understood why. She turned, and for a full second her mind could not reconcile what her eyes were telling her, because the man sitting beside her, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers, did not belong in a place like this. She had grown up around a Beatles-shaped silence in her father's stories. She had never expected that silence to have a face. "Keep going," he said quietly. "You're not wrong about a single note." He placed his hands on the keys. What came out of the old upright in the next 30 seconds was not what the room had been hearing all night. It was the song the way it had been written, the way it had lived inside one man's memory for 62 years, certain and warm and entirely unhurried. Maris found her place inside it, not leading any more, but held by it, the way her father's playing had always held her, without either of them naming what it was doing. The room went silent, the way rooms go silent when language has not caught up yet. He spoke without stopping his hands. He told them, in a voice that performed for no one, that he had written this melody in a hospital corridor in 1962 for a young road crew man whose wife had died the night before a show that could not be canceled. He told them the young man's name was Tommy Calloway. He told them he had asked Tommy to keep it quietly, for one grieving man and no one else, and that Tommy had kept that promise for 62 years, longer than most promises survive a lifetime. Maris's hand stopped moving. Nobody had ever told her that her mother's death was the reason the melody existed at all, or that her father had spent 6 decades turning a eulogy into a lullaby. She was hearing it for the first time in front of 40 strangers and a man who had just rewritten the entire shape of her grief in under a minute. If a story like this one has ever made you believe a single small kindness can outlast 60 years, this is exactly the channel for you, so take a moment now and subscribe before you watch what happens next. The room did not erupt the way rooms erupt for ordinary surprises. It came apart slower, quieter, the way grief does when it finally finds somewhere to land. A woman near the front was crying without trying to hide it. Frank Doyle stood behind his own bar with both hands pressed flat against the counter, staring at the stage like he was trying to memorize it. Paul did not stand to take the moment. He stayed on the bench beside her, letting the silence hold for as long as it needed to. "He used to talk about you," he said quietly, just for her. "Not often, just enough that I knew you existed. He never told me your name. He said that was the one thing he'd kept entirely for himself, Maris could not speak yet. She nodded instead, both hands still resting on keys she was no longer pressing. He reached into his jacket and took out something small, folded soft from age rather than recent handling. A single sheet of paper, the ink gone slightly brown at the edges. He had carried it, he told her, for longer than he could properly explain. The original 4 bars written the night he gave the melody away. The only copy that had ever existed outside his own memory. It was always going to belong to someone in your family eventually, he said. I just didn't know it would take 62 years to find out who. He told her before he stood that he wanted to finish the song properly, not release it as his alone, credit it the way it had always deserved to be credited, to her mother, to her father, to the secret that had outlived both of them. He asked her permission, not her gratitude. She gave it without fully understanding yet what it would mean. He rose from the bench, placed his cap back on, and crossed the room the way he had entered it, unhurried, already disappearing back into being no one in particular. Frank caught the door for him without a word. Nobody filmed it. Nobody stopped him to ask for anything. Maris sat alone at the piano for a long time afterward, the folded paper in her hand, the room emptying slowly around her the way it always did at closing. She had walked up to that piano carrying a promise she didn't understand. She was about to learn exactly what her father had spent his whole life protecting. 6 months later, a short, unlisted recording appeared online with no promotion behind it. The title read simply, "For Rose." The credit beneath it carried 2 names, Tommy Calloway and Paul McCartney. Nobody explained the story attached to it. Nobody needed to. The song did the explaining on its own, the way it always had, quietly, to whoever was paying attention. Maris kept working at the Quarry House for another year before she started teaching piano 2 evenings a week in the back room Frank let her use for free. Her first student was 9 years old, the same age she had been when she first asked her father what song he kept humming. She never told the children the whole story. She told them only what her father had told her, that some songs aren't meant to be explained, only carried, and that carrying one carefully is its own kind of inheritance. Let us return one final time to that night at the Quarry House. A waitress sits at an old upright piano, hands placed the way her father taught her, without ever meaning to. The room around her doesn't recognize what she's playing. She doesn't fully understand it herself yet, only that it matters, only that some promises are worth keeping, even when you don't know why. 12 feet away, a man who buried a piece of his own history 62 years earlier is about to discover that nothing he gave away that quietly was ever truly lost. Paul McCartney did not hand Maris Calloway a phone number or a shortcut to a career that night. He handed her back a piece of her own family that she never knew was missing. He sat down beside a stranger and proved in under 3 minutes that the things people protect in silence don't disappear. They wait. Sometimes for 62 years, sometimes for one person in one small room, brave enough to play them out loud. Somewhere tonight, someone is humming a song they were never told the meaning of. They don't know yet that it's a love letter or an apology or a promise someone made and kept long after they had any reason to. That's the part of music nobody puts in the headlines. It doesn't perform. It waits. Has a song ever carried more history than you realized at the time? Tell us in the comments. We read everyone.